The house on Willow Lane had always been filled with the sounds of life. Footsteps on the hardwood floor, the hum of an old piano, the soft rise and fall of laughter. But lately, silence had become its loudest resident. The kind of silence that presses against the walls, that follows you into rooms and lingers even after you've turned on the music. Nora sat on the windowsill of her bedroom, her forehead resting against the cold glass. Outside, the sky stretched in fading shades of orange and violet. The day was slipping into night, just like her life was slipping into something she didn't quite recognize anymore. Her phone buzzed on the desk beside her. "Mom, dinner's ready." Nora read it, didn't reply. She stayed there, motionless, until the message disappeared into the screen's dim light. Downstairs, her mother, Laura, stood by the dining table, still wearing her work clothes. The sleeves of her blouse were rolled up, her hair falling out of its bun. The pasta on the table was already starting to cool. Her husband, Mark, sat across from her, staring at the empty third chair. "She's not coming down again?" he asked quietly. Laura sighed. She said she wasn't hungry. She didn't say anything. She just stopped showing up. Mark's voice was steady, but underneath it was that tremor, the one Laura had learned to recognize after years of marriage. The tremor that came when he was trying not to sound hurt. "Maybe she just needs time," Laura said, though she didn't really believe it. "She's 17. This is what teenagers do." Mark leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. "Yeah, but it's been months, Laura. I barely remember the last time she actually talked to us. We used to be able to read her like a book. Now it's like trying to read smoke." The house felt too big for three people who used to be inseparable when Nora was little. She and her father would build forts in the living room with old blankets and couch cushions. He'd pretend to be a knight. She'd be the queen of the kingdom. Her mother would bring them snacks and pretend to be the royal cook. Those were the days filled with light and laughter and the smell of pancakes on Saturday mornings. Now, the only thing that remained of those memories was the smell of burnt coffee. That night, Nora slipped out of the house after midnight. She didn't have a plan. She never did. The world felt easier when she was outside, away from walls that seemed to hold all the arguments she didn't want to remember. She walked down the empty streets, hands in the pockets of her oversized hoodie, her headphones drowning out the echoes of home. There was something freeing about being alone under the stars. No one asking questions, no one disappointed in her answers. She found herself at the old bridge, the one her parents used to take her to when she was little. They'd throw stones into the river and watch the ripples spread. Her dad used to tell her that the river carried every story it touched, that even the smallest stone made its mark. Nora leaned against the railing, staring at her reflection in the dark water. "What mark did I even make?" she whispered. She thought of her mother's tired eyes, her father's silence. How every conversation turned into an argument, how every word felt like walking through glass. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Eli, her best friend. "Eli, you okay?" "Nora, yeah, just out walking." "Eli again? It's like 1 a.m. "Nora, can't sleep." "Eli, you talked to your parents yet?" "Nora, what's the point? They don't listen." "Eli, maybe they're waiting for you to say something first." "Nora, then we'll just keep waiting forever." She put her phone away. The truth was, she didn't even know how to start that conversation anymore. Back home, Laura lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The clock ticked past 2 in the morning. She reached out her hand, touching the cold space beside her. Mark wasn't there. She found him in the living room, sitting on the couch, the TV turned on but silent. The glow lit up his face, but his eyes looked lost. "She's not home," Laura said softly. Mark nodded, not looking away from the screen. "I know. You're not going after her?" He shook his head. "I don't even know where she goes anymore. If I show up, she'll just think I'm trying to control her again." Laura sat down beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "We did everything we could, didn't we?" "I don't know," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Maybe that's the problem. We did everything we thought was right, not what she needed." Outside, the headlights of a passing car flickered across the walls, then disappeared. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Nora returned home around 3 a.m. She tiptoed up the stairs, pausing outside her parents' room. Through the crack in the door, she could see them sitting together, not talking, just existing in the same ache. Something in her chest tightened. She wanted to open the door. to say I'm sorry, to say I miss you both. But the words caught somewhere between her heart and her throat. So she went to her room instead. She sat on her bed, pulled her journal from the drawer, and began to write. I don't know how to talk to them anymore. Every time I try, it feels like I'm shouting through glass. They see me, but they don't hear me. I'm scared that one day, even that glass will disappear, and they won't see me at all. She closed the journal, wiped her eyes, and finally let herself fall asleep, downstairs. Mark turned off the TV. Tomorrow, he whispered to Laura. Tomorrow I'll talk to her. But when morning came, tomorrow didn't feel any closer. The morning sunlight slipped quietly through the curtains, landing on Nora's desk, over a pile of unfinished sketches, crumpled papers, and cold coffee. She'd fallen asleep sitting up again. Her phone was full of unread messages from school friends asking why she'd been skipping art club, why she never came to the park anymore. She didn't know what to say. The more she tried to explain herself, the more it all sounded like noise. Downstairs, her mother was rushing to get ready for work. The smell of burnt toast filled the kitchen. Mark stood by the sink, already dressed, but not moving. His coffee had gone untouched. Laura looked up from her planner. You're not going to drink that? He blinked, almost surprised she'd spoken. Oh, no appetite. Mark, you can't keep doing this. You didn't sleep again, did you? He gave a faint shrug. I'll sleep when things get better. Laura wanted to say something, something comforting, something strong, but all that came out was a sigh. You said last night you were going to talk to her today. I will, he said. I just need to find the right words. Laura placed a hand on his arm. Maybe don't look for perfect words. Just talk. He nodded, but as she left for work, he stayed in that same spot, watching the light shift across the counter. The house felt like a museum of memories. Every photo frame on the wall, Nora's first day of school, her high school recital, that family trip to the coast, looked like someone else's life. Upstairs, Nora woke up to the sound of birds outside her window. She rubbed her eyes, then saw a small, folded note pushed under her door. Her father's handwriting. Good morning, kiddo. I made breakfast if you want it. I miss talking to you. Dad. She stared at it for a long moment, unsure what to feel. She wanted to go downstairs. She wanted to sit with him and pretend things were normal again. But part of her felt like she didn't deserve that anymore. Not after all the shouting, all the slammed doors. Instead, she slipped on her hoodie, grabbed her sketchbook, and went out the back door. The town was quiet that morning, bathed in the kind of sunlight that makes everything look softer than it is. Nora walked without direction until she reached the art studio where she used to spend every Saturday. The door was locked now. Funding cuts had forced it to close months ago. She pressed her palm against the glass, remembering the laughter, the smell of paint. The way her mother used to wait outside to walk her home. It was strange how time didn't just change people. It erased whole pieces of who they used to be. She sat on the curb and opened her sketchbook. Most of the pages were blank, but on the first one was a half-drawn portrait of her parents. Her mom smiling, her dad looking proud. She had stopped drawing it halfway through the argument that night, the one that had changed everything. It had started about college. Her parents wanted her to apply to business schools. She wanted to study art. They said art wouldn't pay the bills. She said money wasn't everything. They said she was being naive. She said they didn't understand her. And just like that, everything that had once connected them fractured into silence. Home, Mark finally gathered the courage to go upstairs. He stood in front of her room, hand hovering near the doorknob. The door was still closed, just like it had been for weeks. He took a deep breath and knocked. No answer. When he finally opened it, the room was empty. Her backpack was gone. On the desk was her sketchbook, open to the page with the unfinished portrait. He looked at it for a long time, tracing the pencil lines with his finger. There was something in that drawing that hit him harder than any argument ever had. The frozen smile. The eyes that looked like his, but younger. He sat down on her bed, picked up a pen, and wrote a note in her journal. I don't understand everything you feel right now, but I want to. I just want my daughter back, not the perfect version, just you. We can figure the rest out together. Then he left the journal open on her desk. Hours later, when Nora returned, she found the note. She read it once, twice, then a third time, as if hoping the words would change. They didn't, but something inside her did. She sat down on the bed and started crying. Not the angry kind of tears she'd been used to, but quiet ones. The kind that came from remembering love that hadn't disappeared, just gotten lost somewhere along the way. That evening, she finally came downstairs. Her father was in the living room, watching old home videos. The TV screen flickered with images of a younger Nora dancing in a princess costume, spinning in circles while her parents clapped and laughed. Mark looked up when he heard her footsteps. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Hey," she said softly. He smiled, a little unsure. "Hey, can I sit?" "Of course." She sat beside him. On the screen, her 5-year-old self was shouting something about wanting to be an artist. Mark chuckled quietly. "You were always stubborn," he said. She wiped her eyes. "Guess I still am." "Yeah, you get that from me." There was a pause, the kind that could have easily turned back into silence. But Nora took a breath and said, "I saw your note." Mark nodded slowly. "I meant every word." "I know." She hesitated, then looked at him. "Dad, I don't hate you. I just felt like you stopped believing in me." His face softened. "I never stopped, Nora. I was just scared. The world's hard. I wanted you to be safe." "I get that," she said. "But I need to live my own life, even if I fall." He nodded again, eyes glistening. "Then I'll be there to help you get back up." Laura came home just in time to see the two of them sitting together, smiling through tears. She didn't interrupt. She just leaned against the doorway and watched, letting the warmth of the moment sink in. For the first time in months, the house felt alive again. Later that night, the three of them had dinner together. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward pauses, a few nervous laughs, but it was something. A beginning. After dinner, Nora showed them her sketchbook. "I started drawing again," she said. "I want to finish this one." Mark smiled. "Can I see when it's done? You can help me with it if you want." Laura's eyes filled with quiet joy. "I'd love that." As the night wore on, they talked, not about grades or careers or mistakes, just about life. About the little things they'd missed in each other's absence. It wasn't that everything was suddenly fixed. It was that they finally wanted to try again. When Nora went to bed that night, she looked out the window at the same sky she'd stared at so many times before. It looked different now, not because it had changed, but because she had. Downstairs, her parents sat together, holding hands in the dim light of the living room. For the first time in a long while, silence didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. Programa ChatGPT Skazilla. Perfect. Here's part 3, final part, of Echoes of the Same Sky, written in a cinematic, emotional, realistic tone, around 12,000 characters. It continues from where part 2 ended, showing how the bond between Nora and her parents changes over the following years. Part 3. What remains when the years move on? The seasons passed quietly, like pages in a well-worn book. Winter melted into spring. Spring burst into summer. The house that had once echoed with tension began to sound like home again, laughter returning in small, uncertain steps. Nora was 19 now. The walls of her room were covered in sketches and half-finished canvases, splashes of color that spoke louder than words ever could. Her parents didn't always understand her art, but they didn't need to. They'd learned to simply believe in it. Mark had gone back to working at the construction firm, but he left the office earlier now. Laura took fewer overtime shifts. They had started cooking dinner together again. Simple meals, often imperfect, but full of warmth. Sometimes Nora joined them. Sometimes she stayed in her room, painting with music playing too loud. Either way, it felt okay. There was peace in coexistence. One evening, Nora came home from her part-time job at the art store with a letter clutched in her hand. Her cheeks were flushed, eyes wide with disbelief. "Mom, Dad," she shouted as she ran through the door. "You have to see this." Mark looked up from the couch. "What is it?" She unfolded the paper with trembling hands. "I got in. The scholarship, the one for the art program in Florence." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Laura gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Oh, honey." Mark stood, stunned. "Florence? Italy, Florence." Nora nodded, laughing through tears. "Yeah, I didn't think I'd get it. They only choose like 10 students a year." Her father crossed the room and pulled her into a tight hug. "You did it," he whispered. "You actually did it." It was one of those rare moments when everything in the world aligned, when all the broken pieces of the past felt like they'd led exactly here. That night they celebrated with homemade pizza, the closest thing they had to Italian food. The air smelled of melted cheese and hope. But as the excitement settled, a quiet unease crept in. The scholarship was for 2 years. 2 years in another country, thousands of miles away. Later, when Nora was asleep, Mark sat at the kitchen table, staring at the acceptance letter. "It's incredible," he said softly, "but she's still so young." Laura nodded, pouring 2 cups of tea. "She's ready. You know she is." "I know," he said. I don't want to lose her again." Laura smiled sadly. "We're not losing her. We're just letting her fly." Mark looked down at his hands, rough from years of work. "I spent so long trying to protect her that I forgot she was growing up anyway." "Then maybe the best way to protect her now," Laura said gently, "is to let her go." The day Nora left for Italy, the sky was clear and blue, the same shade it had been the day she was born. At the airport, they hugged for a long time, saying 1,000 things without speaking. "Promise you'll call," Laura whispered. "I will. Every week," Nora said. Mark smiled, his voice steady though his eyes glistened. "And promise you'll eat real food. Not just pastries." She laughed. "No promises there." As she walked toward the gate, she turned one last time. Her parents stood together, older now, quieter, but stronger. She waved. They waved back. And then she was gone. Florence was everything Nora had dreamed of. The streets were alive with history and art. Old walls covered in ivy, the smell of espresso and rain. She studied in small studios with open windows and professors who spoke in lyrical, passionate Italian. For the first time, she felt like she belonged entirely to her own life. But she missed home more than she expected. Every Sunday, she called her parents. Sometimes the connection lagged. Sometimes they just stared at each other, smiling through the screen. Mark would always ask the same question. "Are you safe?" Laura would always ask, "Are you eating well?" And Nora would always answer, "Yes, I promise." She told them about her classes, about the sculptures she was learning to mold, about a friend named Luca who showed her the best bakery in town. Her parents listened, proud but wistful. The house felt too quiet without her. Time passed. Seasons changed again. 2 years blurred into one long, beautiful rhythm of creation and discovery. Then one night, as Nora was finishing a painting for her final exhibition, her phone buzzed. It was a video call from home, but it wasn't Sunday. "Mom," she answered, smiling. "You're calling early." But it wasn't her mother's voice that replied. It was trembling. "Honey, it's Dad. He's in the hospital." The brush fell from Nora's hand. The world seemed to narrow to a single sound, her mother's breathing through the phone. When she landed back home 2 days later, the air smelled like rain. The drive to the hospital was a blur. She found her mother sitting by the window in the waiting room, hands clasped together. "What happened?" Nora whispered. Laura looked up, eyes red. "Heart attack. They said it was mild, but he's going to need rest. A lot of it." When Nora entered his room, Mark was awake, pale but smiling. "Hey, kiddo," he said weakly. "Didn't think I'd get you to fly home this fast." She laughed through tears, gripping his hand. "Don't joke like that." "Sorry. Bad habit." He looked older, somehow smaller, but his eyes still had that familiar warmth. "You didn't have to come all this way," he said. "I did," she whispered. "You're my dad." They sat together in silence, the kind that carried every unspoken thing between them. Over the next weeks, Nora stayed home to help him recover. The house filled again with slow, patient days, quiet meals, short walks, soft laughter. Mark's heart was weak, but his spirit was stubborn as ever. One evening, as they sat in the backyard watching the sunset, Mark spoke. "You know," he said, "I used to think success meant keeping you close, making sure you were safe. But seeing you in Florence, hearing how happy you were, that's when I finally understood what success really means." "What?" she asked. "Raising someone who doesn't need you to hold their hand anymore." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'll always need you, Dad, just not in the same way." He smiled. "That's exactly what I mean." Months later, when Nora returned to Italy to finish her final term, she carried something new with her, a sense of peace. She painted her last exhibition piece with her father's words in mind. It was a large canvas, a girl standing on a hill, her parents behind her, their faces blurred but their silhouettes clear against the horizon. Above them stretched the same endless blue sky. She titled it "What Remains." At the exhibition, her professors and classmates praised her work. But what mattered most was the video call that night, her parents sitting on the couch back home, watching through her phone's camera. "It's beautiful," Laura said. Mark wiped his eyes. "You captured us perfectly." Even the part one never said out loud. What part is that? Nora asked, smiling. That I'm proud of you. More than you'll ever know. Years drifted by. Nora graduated, began teaching art workshops, then opened a small studio of her own. She came home often, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Mark's health wavered, but he lived to see her first solo exhibition in their hometown. When he walked into the gallery, holding Laura's hand, he stopped in front of the largest painting, a reimagined version of that family portrait she had never finished years ago. This time, it was complete. He stood there for a long time, eyes glistening, then turned to her. You finished it. Nora smiled softly. With your help. He looked at her, the little girl who used to paint on the kitchen table, now an artist whose work spoke to hundreds. You know, he said quietly, I think I finally understand art. How so? She asked. It's what keeps love visible, even when time tries to hide it. She didn't say anything. She just hugged him, holding on like she was trying to stop the world from moving forward. Years later, when Mark passed away peacefully one autumn morning, Nora painted again. Not for exhibitions or applause, just for him. She painted the sky he loved, the one they'd both looked at from different sides of the world. She painted 3 silhouettes, a father, a mother, and a daughter, all standing beneath the same horizon. And in that painting, there was no distance left at all, because some bonds, once mended, never break again. They simply echo, softly, endlessly, beneath the same sky.